All right. Thank you everyone for joining the Canoe SIG community meeting, especially focused around CAPE, Community AI Platform Engineering. We have several community members. We're going to briefly talk about updates from KubeCon and updates on end-to-end demo on how structured outputs, A2A streaming, and Agent Forge plugin updates have come together, and this is something we have an internal milestone to update our own production. Some things we can do around sandbox environments. Maybe this is an area where we can maybe touch with you, Liam, on if you are doing anything in the cloud on how, if you are downloading files and working with them, how we can do that in a more WebAssembly kind of way. So we can scope that here. There is a request for a standalone Backstage UI, getting community feedback on that. And we need to spend a little bit time on roadmap planning, hand in hand, kind of do quality assurance, QA, and release cadence so that we're not making a lot of breaking changes and burning people's time. So try to do these things in parallel. So without further ado, I'll provide a brief update on the first day of KubeCon. That's the only day I was able to attend, fortunately, and I'll pass it to anyone who, I think, Liam, you were there as well. We can do a tag team update. I don't know if, Adam, were you able to join KubeCon this year?
I was not, unfortunately.
Okay, no worries. So I'll do a quick update from a couple of talks that I attended and the one that Carlos and I presented. So I'll start with that one. So Carlos Santana and myself, we presented a way to create MCP servers using our OpenAPI CodeGen library. So this is the one that we presented in the talk. And in the examples, there is the Argo workflows server that we auto-generated. I think the explanation we sort of gave, and this is some of the improvements that have happened, even as Carlos and I have been validating. I think there are a lot of limitations of using an OpenAPI spec directly as an MCP server. For example, a lot of LLMs have 64 character limit on the functions of the tool calls. There are other limitations on the size of the prompts and the parameter list, etc. So our argument was that you can't just directly use the OpenAPI spec. It has to go through a certain amount of validation and massaging to get it right. It was well received, but again, there is just a lot of simultaneous work or contemporary work in this space. We should definitely assess if our investment here is continue to give us fruitful results or look at other tools that have been proposed to see if they are working any better. Certainly both. I think AWS has a open API spec generator. I think Fast API has one. Agent Gateway has one. My experience with it, especially Agent Gateway, was it didn't recognize some of the functions and it still had the same limitations. If you just take a raw OpenAPI spec, it did not work well. Anyway, I'll pause here and see if there is any community comments or feedback. So this was one of the talks that we presented. There was also an update from Acuity. Acuity donated the Argo CD MCP server to Argo project. So we should definitely take a look at this. This is basically the same exact code that was there when Acuity built this. I think the limitations are still the same. Um, they're handwriting this code, which is okay, but I think it doesn't support many of the functionalities that we have in our Argo City MCP. We need to reconcile with the team in Acuity and see how we can also donate the Argo Workflows MCP we created as well as the rollouts and provide that automated QA validation and evaluation. So this is the other significant development. There were a lot of talks around AI and MCP in this space. I encourage everyone to, when the recordings are out in YouTube, let's tag team check them out and see which ones are relevant to us and see how we can consume Cape. Um, there were also there was a lot of genuine interest from the community around Cape. Um, we should try to reach out to some of the folks who have expressed interest and see how they can consume it as well. Those are the couple of things, at least the highlights I have from day one. It's been very fast. It's hard to check out all the presentations. There were so many great ones. I plan to do some offline listening once all the recordings are posted. Liam, I know you were in booth a lot, but did you have any highlights from your side?
Yeah, I thought the AI Day and the Platform Engineering Day had a bunch of interesting talks. The best talk that I saw was actually from the Home Depot Platform Engineering team. And I think what they have really pioneered is an operational construct that is like centered around shift down, where the platform provides the resiliency on a store by store level. So there's a cache, for like caching common SKUs and things like that from the cloud for any lookups out. And then there's a pub sub that developers program against for sending updates back. And it was just fascinating for their journey and the scale that they're at. They're 2,500 stores or something. And the presentation was really crisp and well done. Dylan, the guy that pitched it, just did a phenomenal job. Um, so I think but there was a lot of people that were just interested in the platform engineering space, and I think in the concept of, how do I make the overall environment better? So I think it's very well aligned to the Canoe overall efforts and initiatives that are there. I think that most people are still struggling with the getting my platform right. And they dream of like getting my AI right on my platform. There's interest, but and a lot of like experimentation, but I don't know that there's a lot in production yet. And that kind of reflects, I think, what we see, as well. I think the we my CTO was the chair of WasmCon, so we were overly involved there, and there were a lot of good talks there. But those I think are very focused at WebAssembly for WebAssembly nerds, as opposed to the less platform engineering outcome. They're more of like deep dives and things like that. So yeah, I thought it was overall was good, but I agree that there's so much going on simultaneously that I always have to go back and find the gems and review them. So that would be fun if we like tried to find some of the best talks and share them.
Yeah, that would be good. And if you see them offline, even if you weren't physically there, if you come across a great talk, please post it here. There were several great ones around. I think AI MCP was all over the agenda, so it was very difficult to keep up with them. But I think Neil, one of the things that I was mentioning earlier was the MCP for Argo CD was donated. This is the same MCP that Acuity built. So it doesn't have all the rich features that when we generated the MCP from OpenAPI. Certainly, we should reach back out to our Acuity team and see how we can contribute back or see if there is a middle path. Um, the Argo workflow stock was well received. One of the things that we highlighted was the challenges of using the you know if, if you're using OpenAPI spec as is, um, it doesn't necessarily result in, great outcomes. So we highlighted some challenges here in a markdown file, basically, especially the Argo workflows. If you're using Swagger 2.0 versus 3.0, there are certain character length limitations of the functions themselves. So LLMs like Claude, like with Bedrock or even OpenAI, were when you give function names lengths that are over 64 characters, it would reject them or wouldn't even consume that as a tool. So I don't know how the generators take care of them, but they also don't enhance the documentation. At least this is our thesis. So I think we should do some more QA on this and make a proposal to the Argo project. At least that's one of the ones that we demonstrated in the talk, to say that, hey, this could be like one of the official Argo workflows MCP server. Are there any questions, thoughts on that? We can expand more in future once we get more concrete on these.
Yeah, I think I actually, sorry to delay. I've actually been playing with that Argo CD MCP already.
Yeah.
I found it just before KubeCon. Understanding that it's not got all the operations that the one in Cape has. I think where my head is there is like, is it something where we can help them get to the place where the Cape one is, or yeah, it'd be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah. So the one with Cape, I regenerated the Argo CD code. This is kind of from the latest OpenAPI spec. Some of the enhancements we did were around like truncating the function names. I think there is an argument to be made if in fact we need all of these functions, or how do we like minimize some of that. I think the one that Acuity donated was handwritten, and it doesn't have all the functions. And how do they keep up with the evolving OpenAPI spec in Argo CD? There are some. We should probably join a community meeting and see how we can reconcile that. Neil, I know you had this question on the OpenAPI spec. Anything else you want to add here, or any other thoughts you have on the OpenAPI to MCP spec, code generators?
I think before they're donated to a project, I would assume that these projects are going to want the question of maintainability. We talked about this a long time ago. Things might have changed, right? But at least really early on when I looked at the generator, it was generating like the whole Python project. Ideally, it should be generating just the tools and if you look at say the OpenAPI generators for say Java or TypeScript, I've used those quite a bit, and they're gonna you need to be able to get to a point where you can only generate maybe this already does this, and maybe I'm talking past where we're at in the project now, but obviously you need to be able to have a mode where you can only generate the stuff that's going to change, right? People need to be able to modify the project, modify everything else without it getting just blatted over when you rerun the generator. So I think that for this to be effective and for other people to consider, I would assume for other people to consider taking it on, there needs to be a model where you can iteratively generate it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something where you have to generate it once, make some changes. When you generate it again, you've got to do a whole bunch of like merging or something for whatever.
Yeah.
But if it's already doing that, I apologize for talking off bat.
No, I think we should validate that. I think because there is an LLM component to it in the middle, it may, at least the enhancements that it generates could, I wouldn't say conflict, but it could reword them differently. We can give sufficient system prompts so that it doesn't change the ones that it already generated previously. There could be some enhancements there for sure. But I think what's obviously better and different about the tool we wrote is it uses LLM for enhancements, and it also takes care of some of the limitations that like just pure converters were seeing with them. When I was debugging with especially like Agent Gateway, it was quite opaque when it converted some of the OpenAPI spec to the MCP. Because if there is a stack trace, it's in Rust, and now you have to go look at the source code of a specific tool. Whereas if you have the entire source code of Python, maybe you can add debugs and at least triage it. That's kind of what the limitations we were seeing. But we should double click on it and pick one example. I think Argo Workflows is the one that I would probably do an end-to-end test again, and Argo CD as well. All right, Neil, if you don't have any other closing thoughts, we can move on to other topics. Also, if you have any agenda items, feel free to add here. I'm going to lean on Sunny. I'll introduce this topic. We've been making a lot of changes to CAPE, especially around streaming. I think there was one around enabling structured output, which I think we're going to disable by default and kind of clean it out. But a lot of this is working end to end really well. We have an internal milestone to move this to our own, like move it from CAPE to Jarvis to CAPE production. So I don't know if Sunny, I'm going to put you on the spot. If we have a quick few-minute demo. I know this was demoed last week. There were some more enhancements that were made to do structured output with forums, etc. We can quickly showcase and get feedback from the community.
Yeah.
And then we can move on to some sandbox environments and, how do we do backstage UI development. Sunny, on to you if you have a few
Yeah, I'll
minutes to
spend
demo.
a few minutes because I think a lot of it is probably less open source relevant, to be honest, because main thing was for us to go to prod internally. We had to do a lot of integration. So
I think,
saying
sorry to
that,
interrupt. I think it also helps set the stage for how do you bring your own internal enterprise agents. So what Sunny is showing is our own internal enterprise agent that is not in CAPE, but we are able to connect with CAPE and use it. So sorry, Sunny.
so I found some new bugs, so I'll just swiftly hide that. But the idea is that, so we currently have an internal legacy agent called Jarvis. So any of you who were here last week, I might have demoed it. At this point, I'm sorry, but the memory is slightly blurry. But basically, we have the agent forge, and I added some support such as like tagging, so that what it does on the backend side, well, backside of it is that it just simply adds like prefix that is completely customizable. So that, for example, if the user wants to use the backward compatible or Jarvis internal tool that they're familiar with, they can easily click this button, or some of these suggestions are tied to it. So I guess something I didn't quite demo last gig is probably like some nice cards that we support now. So for example, this example prompt is actually tied to our legacy Jarvis agent, which is currently hooked under supervisor agent as one of the sub agents. And what it's gonna do now is that, so Jarvis always worked with these cards, and it is now able to go through supervisor agent and give this card for the user to then input. So this wasn't working last week. I've also fixed so that required fields are actually shown as required, whereas optional fields are not. It also does populate these kind of values that's more internal to us. So if any other agents that someone else wants to bring on does want to have these kind of user card inputs, you can integrate it. It's just that I guess none of our sub agents currently in our repo does this, but we do have the capability now to pass to the supervised agent, or if you're using the Backstage with Agent Forge plugin, it can also display that as well.
So this is not part of the backstage agent. This is part of Jarvis.
So this, you mean the card?
Yeah,
what
card.
produce the card. So the card itself, the way it works is that I can probably show some logs. Basically, Jarvis itself does stuff like user auto approve probably. So I have very long logs. Let me run. So it basically what Jarvis sends us is something like this. So it has this answer, which is like a plain text, and then it actually sends you the metadata, which is going to be passed in as a card. So this is what supervisor agent is currently logging, and the metadata is saying, okay, you need to now display these user input cards, and info fields are following. And this is now then processed by Agent Forge and shown as a card the user can submit. So it is like a separate metadata structure. Does that kind of make sense? Okay.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Mhm.
I'm just, yeah, I mean, I think my original interest in this was wanting to be able to do we still never actually spent that much time on it, but we were trying to have templates be easy here or to submit via the chat interface. So I just, we never run into it. I was kind of curious about this implementation.
Yeah, because I think what Jarvis does is it basically has two calls with these fields required, right? So it basically just passes that, and supervisor now can properly pass this metadata and all the way to whatever user interface you choose at the end of the day. Because so if you were interested in more supporting these, our Cape supervisor can definitely handle it. I don't know what's the best way to show, but it'll basically, I think, is it here or somewhere? It'll be able to, oh no, that's the one I sent, and then the response, I might have to find which one it is. But it will actually send out the card to Agent Forge, which, actually I did fix something on Agent Forge as well, which might be, because I know where, at least on the Agent Forge side, the code is. Because what I realized yesterday was it also was making all the input fields to be required, which wasn't working well for us. So all it's doing is it's kind of rendering this platform engineer response. And then if it has metadata with input fields, it will then display it like this. So even if you're not necessarily using Agent Forge, if you can process the metadata with input fields, you can just show the card.
Gotcha. That's good. Let's check that out.
Awesome. Anything else? I don't know, Shri, is there anything else worth showing? I wonder. I think I showed the email prefix and stuff before, and like the JWT token passing and everything, all that last week or the week before as well.
No, I think this is good. What I wanted to highlight is today, as Sunny demonstrated, our internal agent is sending that metadata object, but ideally the response format I posted in the chat, I think if the supervisor agent, based on the input from the sub-agents, if it can send that same response format, Agent Forge can detect the metadata and render the form. And it's also transparent to the non, like if some other agent that's A2A compatible, but not Agent Forge is getting these messages, it will not render the rich text. It'll just render that it's just a whatever is in the text part of the message. So we kind of separated out this to be more rich text or richly formatted output and forms. So in future, I think we can certainly see like agents like GitHub or others, if someone is creating a pull request or, hey, I need to open an issue on this project, I can certainly see the output of that agent come in as the platform engineer response format, like the Pydantic object or the JSON. And if it's Agent Force that's looking at it, it'll do the input format. If it's something else, some other A2A compatible inspector, and it will just show the text. There were enhancements to the chat CLI as well that renders this, but we can show that in the next future demo. I don't know if you had a chance to show all the streaming from on the chat CLI, Sunny.
I don't think I showed anything on the chat CLI. I
Yeah,
think
no
I
worries.
only demoed on the Agent Forge side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's pause for any questions. I don't know if anyone has a chance, has had a chance to try this out.
I haven't had a chance to try out well, it was one of the stuff I think having seen the streaming stuff the last couple of calls, I was looking a little bit more at, how that was working, things like the tool updates getting sent through. So yeah, this makes sense. I think this is something I've heard a couple of people try to ask for when I've talked to them about this kind of stuff, is how can I structured inputs. I mean, as far as I'm aware, A2A has an idea of where you can request the server to return structured outputs,
Yeah.
but there's nothing kind of the opposite as far as I'm aware right now.
That is true. Yeah, it still goes as a semantic input to the LLM. And in our case, I don't know if you saw when Sunny sent this form, it still sends it as a JSON payload to the supervisor. In our case, the supervisor obviously is smart enough to recognize it, but it's a good question to understand. One of the biggest things we struggle with is because we have the distributed sub-agent supervisor architecture, being able to send the structured output both from the sub-agent and then again parse it in supervisor, reason on it, and then send that again. That has been a big challenge. I think we got it nailed down, and I'm not fully convinced the way it's doing structured output is the final design, because there were some limitations in LangGraph itself that were fixed in LangGraph 1.0. But I'm sure the other frameworks have some other maybe limitations or enhancements. We should definitely try it in not just LangGraph, but other frameworks.
Yeah, and the way that the tool updates worked kind of made sense, right? Using artifacts,
Yeah.
Like you've kind of semi-standardized some artifact things that get pushed through. I mean, while we're in this area, the one thing that I was kind of confused about was the use case for direct streaming from sub-agents back to the UI. Like I can see why there's an idea there of what it could be used for.
Yeah.
When I was digging through that executor now is an absolute monster. I think it's like over 1,000 lines of code. And I think that all the different modes and all the different configuration options to me are a little confusing. I don't really know what's going on.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that was done at a time when at least I was trying so many options. I think we settled on just one default option. Really, I would say 40% or upwards of that should be removed, since basically there's only one option that we know that works and so we support. Everything else was experimental, and honestly, it's confusing everybody. Let's remove that.
Okay.
I agree with you.
Sure. Yeah, because I was trying to figure out like what was going on there and how to enable the various features, and I just kind of don't get me wrong, I didn't spend a whole lot of time, but I spent long enough where I was just like my head started to hurt. So yeah, seeing that cleaned up would be cool.
Yeah, I think it's starting to hurt even in my head. I couldn't understand after like a month. Okay, what's going on here? So I think the default option is everything goes through the supervisor. That's the best design pattern. What I was trying to do is trying to bypass the supervisor to reprocess some requests, but it turns out it's far more complex and it doesn't really suit the whole supervisor pattern design. So I think just cutting it out is probably the best option. Yeah.
Yeah, I could kind of see why your head went that direction of like why this could be an interesting idea to just bypass it a little bit, but yeah, I think it's
Yeah, it was a major hack at that time, and I think but probably removing it is. I think I was looking at keyword search and other things. Maybe there is such a time when we could think about like the subagents. Maybe if it happens so that the UI is in a conversational type design pattern, or in some kind of a pub sub mechanism where it doesn't have to go through supervisor. But right now, the way we've architected, since everything goes through supervisor, it's probably best to basically clean up that code and not confuse everybody.
Okay. That was good to get your thoughts. I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. I think the new changes were also, I was rereading the spec from A2A. It supports something called a data part and a text part. So these are two different event types. So the data part is meant to send like JSON or any kind of structured payload, and text part is purely text. So that's one of the ways that the structured output is sent. So you can actually send both. So that's one of the new innovations is if the client only receives the text part or it can only parse the text part, then it doesn't show the structured output. So basically you can support both in this architecture. All right, thank you, Sunny, for the demo. We will go to the next topic. I think one of the things that may still be a little bit of a bug or it may still need to be adjusted is when the supervisor was running queries in parallel, a lot of the agents would start streaming their tokens in simultaneously. I think today we accumulate all of that into a single buffer to render or send it to the supervisor to process that and then send it to the client. Because these tokens come at arbitrarily, one thought process I had was to write to a local workspace or a tempfs so that individual token streams are written to separate files, and then you can combine them into a final output so you can process or send it to the UI client. I guess that kind of raised some alarm bells in my head. Okay, if I'm accessing the file system, then we should properly sandbox the environment. So anyway, it just occurred to me that, hey, we were talking about WebAssembly and a few other things to sandbox things. There could be other things as in like local tools we could do if we are doing curl requests or downloading logs, for example, for troubleshooting. Let's say 5-point kpet, hey, troubleshoot the CI failure for me, and it's trying to download a CI GitHub Action CI logs or something like that. It may write something to a file system, so we should probably have some safeguards around not writing to its own Python files and corrupting the files or doing some weird reloads. Anyway, it did occur to me that if there is a way we could leverage some of the work that Liam you were championing to see if we could add that to the Cave infrastructure.
I'll maybe introduce maybe how we understand the problem, and then pull up a sandbox, and we can talk our way through it, and folks can just ask questions as we go. That works.
Yeah.
So as we understand the problem, we think that one of the key missing things that we have today in platform engineering is a lack of capability-driven security on the server-side infrastructure. So capabilities are, dominant everywhere else. If you think about your phone or your browser, every time you install an app, it says this app wants to use your contacts, your microphone, your web page, and we've accepted that this is kind of like table stakes everywhere. If we look at just a Chrome tab, you can see that everything has kind of like moved toward this model. And containers, are great for packaging, and they make deployment easy. but at a large scale, they sort of lead to problems on replicating common code, like the operating system, requiring a lot of ongoing changes. Sometimes that even includes bringing development teams into the loop, to patch CVEs, and you end up in this world sometimes where 5,000 teams are each fixing the same vulnerability once. And this theory in platform engineering that we see embraced at a lot of places is shifting down and sort of looking at these problems of containers and trying to give developers other alternatives with containers. This is not competitive. This is like trying to compare a container to a virtual machine or a virtual machine to hardware. It's just a different layer of abstraction. So we use WebAssembly, which has kind of come to dominate on the enterprise side in the browser. Here's a sample of apps that you likely use every day, but we could include this app. The little filters here are running in WebAssembly in the background. The big edges are all WebAssembly, Cloudflare Workers, Fastly. Big web apps like Max and Prime are all WASM, and this was just a selection of apps, that we saw at Salesforce, at Adobe, and other places. So if this is a great tech that's used server side, could we also use this to build, client side, could we also use this to build server side infrastructure just like Cloudflare does? So that's what CNCF WASM Cloud does. It when you compile something to WebAssembly and you create a component, you look at the inputs and the outputs, and you start with a deny by default sandbox. Out of the box, a WebAssembly component is just a CPU. It's just i32s all the way down. And when you add a capability like an HTTP interface or a file system, that is where you would want to have that capability-driven control. And WebAssembly, to be clear, doesn't eliminate vulnerabilities in the app, but it does provide you with a very smaller abstraction. I apologize, my wife has a flat tire. Let me just see if that's her. When you call the tow truck driver honey, haha. Vulnerabilities can still exist in the app layer, but what this does do is it gives you a much smaller programming surface, and then at scale, this gives you a collection of tightly scoped applications that serve to kind of address the some of the opportunities we see in containers, and it's really about moving those capabilities down. So things that you can easily sandbox in WebAssembly are not just file systems, but networking and any of the other sort of capabilities that we see that have side effects on the underlying system, things that they would leave behind. So let's take a look at a sandbox. So here I've created a WebAssembly component that is an MCP server. And if we kind of look through the capabilities here, these are the things outside of the core CPU that you would get with WebAssembly that you could sandbox. There are things here like terminals, but there are file systems. If you look, we don't even give someone sockets. We're giving somebody HTTP, which is a subset of the sockets interface, because you can extend and add your own capabilities with WebAssembly. So this is the theory for what we're doing and why we think it's exciting. Who has questions? Comments? Criticisms? Observations?
I think I would like to see some in the context of Cape. I mean, I do understand like doing, I know there is some there is an MCP component and how we can use on the server side. In the context of Cape, if you can find a use case we can build on top of, I can see some supervisor use cases where if we end up supporting like curling a URL, or if there is a tool called curl URL, what does it do, and can we download a file? Maybe if we take a use case and have WASM as a tool in Cape or WASM Cloud, and that works, like there is a concept that we recently introduced a tool called Workspace. And if that workspace could be like a WASM Cloud workspace, that could be an interesting use case. I would probably go in that direction and maybe implement in Cape.
Yeah.
But that's my perspective.
I think where we see the best fit for the tech is as a part of the multi-tenant user experience. So things that we see people leveraging are things like cron triggers, like I have something that needs to happen every hour and I don't want to just deploy a container for this, or HTTP triggers or messaging triggers, things that are very elastic. Traditionally, WebAssembly has only been reactors, that I make a stateless Lambda, if you will, like I make a function call and there's no reentrancy. But with the latest version, WASM P3, WebAssembly actually supports reentrancy. So the examples that we'll be launching in WASM Cloud over the next couple months are things like PG Bouncer, SQLX, which is an ORM, or like a database object relational manager. I think that's what it stands for Postgres, including a driver. So we'll be putting both stateful and stateless examples out. And we do actually have some examples like that already, Sri, that like a blob store example and a virtual file system example and some of that just in our like standard examples. So I can take a look and experiment a bit from there. When the KubeCon videos come out, I'll also link in the Adobe video. What they are doing is they're doing image watermarking on the edge, and the use case for them is they have an AI model that they do not want to share because they think the model itself has some proprietary value. So they're able to deploy the model on edge systems at Akamai and then stream and do their watermarking on the edge there. So I'm working on getting like some real customer use cases out, and then we should have a white paper that we launch with Raytheon here shortly. That's a AWS GovCloud use case that has a couple of MCP servers and a couple of functions that will be open source as well. That they have been working through. We're going to help them get that released here and white papered out. So I'll take a look at Cape and see if we can do like some example integrations, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
Any other questions or thoughts or comments? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam, for presenting. Certainly, we do want to get better at these two items at the bottom, but maybe this is a question for Neil as well on Backstage UI. We've made significant progress with like showcasing, rendering the execution plan, streamed output, as well as like the cards. What we're realizing is that I think the continual like improvements in development in the Backstage plugin, and the plugin itself has limitations on the UI surface, etc. So we were wondering if there is a scope for more Cape standalone UI using some rich React components that are out there like Copilot, Kit, etc. Maybe this could be a common UI library, but again, I don't know how much do we want to get. There is always this, like, how much do we invest in the UI versus bare minimum UI. Just wanted to get some community thoughts around this versus what we do internally at Cisco.
Yeah, I actually saw the issue that you raised. I just realized I haven't even turned this on. I saw the issue that you raised around like UI thing. And I kind of have two conflicting thoughts. The first one is, I think it would be really cool to have a UI library that you could use in a bunch of different applications. But then the only concern I have is like, well, not concern. The flip side to that is, if people install it into Backstage, will it still pick up like the theming that they've done in the rest of their application and all that kind of stuff? Like, I guess the question mark for me is, what do they lose? And I just don't know enough to answer that. And I think that's something we'd want to just be really careful to understand, because I can see the value of having it. I think being able to test this in a web app without having to have a whole Backstage is reasonable. It's nice. So whether it's, and there may be middle paths here around, there's maybe some of the plumbing underneath the UI elements can be shared. I don't know. That's just gonna, you can tell I've thought a little bit about this, not a huge amount. I can see the benefits and the cons here.
Yeah. Especially around authentication and authorization, we've noticed that we're kind of, I mean, it's not, I mean, the threat model in Backstage is they don't, like, we are extracting the ID token, we're requesting one and passing that to the agent. That only has a 5-minute expiry unless you use the Backstage token, which, you know, it auto rotates. So it's also a little kludgy to do it that way, like to get the ID token. Like, for example, if you're using Cognito or Okta, in our case, we're using Okta. So Backstage itself doesn't want to give the ID token from the provider, upstream provider. It only gives you, it does better rotation of the token for the Backstage JWT. So there are some limitations of that. And if you want to use that token to relay that to downstream subagents, like for token exchange and other like identity, you know, subsystems for all the agentic identity on behalf of delegation. So you can't use the Backstage JWT. So we're starting to see some limitations there.
Yeah. And I know we actually talked about this last week while you were out a little bit. Because Sunny was mentioning that, you know, the Backstage jobs getting passed through, you can use that at least in terms of, you could in theory use it as part of like, I know who the user is. I've been fortunately or unfortunately for the last 4 or 5 days doing a rabbit hole on OAuth and kind of like some of the things here. I think so Backstage, I think Backstage itself, obviously they've already got their mechanism to get access tokens for some other service, right? You can use that for GitHub. You can use it for probably GitLab and other stuff. Instead of using a GitHub app to access like the stuff from Backstage, you can use the person's identity, right? So they already have a mechanism where you can expose an OAuth flow through Backstage to get an access token that they then store for a system that's not Backstage. That in theory could then be passed up as the authorization header.
Mhm.
So you could pass, I don't know, I need to try this out, but in theory, I guess you could pass something from your organization's SSO, right? If you've got access token from that or ID token, whatever you're going to use, you could pass that up as the header, as long as you've plumbed into the Backstage stuff. And I think that would probably give you a bit more flexibility there. And obviously, when you're starting to get into like, yeah, token exchange and all that kind of stuff, I think that's where that probably, I haven't used it, but I imagine that would start to give us more flexibility in terms of like how that authentic or how that identity and authorization stuff is handled.
Yeah, so I think Sunny and I, that's one of the things we tried. That limit. The problem is that token that we can extract from the provider is it's a short-lived token, because I think they do back channel auth, or when the callback comes, they kind of manage that the ID token in the the Backstage backend. So the client only gets a 5-minute token, and it somehow doesn't also auto refresh. So you have to basically seek a new token on the client side. So we were seeing the token expiring and not refreshing unless the user reloads the page. I don't know if that's just a limitation of how we implemented, or if it's just the way the Backstage is not really meant to grab the ID token from the provider itself.
I've been using an unhealthy amount of system service accounts rather than floating through the identity. So I'm not the person who's the deepest on this aspect, but my understanding is if they use it for the GitHub integration in what you can, an option for the GitHub integration in Backstage. I imagine if you want to get your GitHub workflow deployments, you don't have to re-authenticate every 5 minutes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't specifically use the GitHub token.
What I'm saying is more that like the underlying mechanism in Backstage, I don't know for sure, but I'd be surprised if they're just going to lock you off at 5 minutes, since they need long-lived access to stuff that they seem to be already doing, I think, but I need to give it a try. Because I would expect that the way, unless they've deliberately done it, the way I would expect it to work would be they trigger the flow to your SSO provider or whichever authentication provider you're going to, they take the access token that should have an expiration. I'm not a security expert. I assume that expiration is dictated by the identity provider and not by Backstage, and they just take that token and shove it into their token store, and then you can access that through the API they give you.
Yeah, I think that's definitely sounds right. I think based on the identity provider, you can also get a refresh token, and the service will refresh the access or ID tokens when it knows it expires. But anyway, I don't know if Sunny, you have any additional info. We saw some limitations of that ID using that ID token. We need to double click, and I think I was hoping to talk to somebody at KubeCon around Backstage, but unfortunately I couldn't connect with anyone. But we'll reach out to some folks in the open source and see if our understanding is correct or not. Yeah.
But I have been exploring a few different angles of this in my little side project, just for experiment's sake. So over the weekend, I was playing with like a Slack bot that has your OAuth identity. I've got an MCP server that uses OAuth and then floats that up to the A2A server. So you've got identity through Slack, you've got identity through MCP, and obviously if you just pass the JOT straight through A2A, you get it like is being done there. What I'm working on playing with now is token exchange for like calling Argo CD, for example. So we'll see where I can
Sounds
take
good. Yeah, if any of your experiments are relevant, we would love to see that. Last but not least, in the 1 minute we have, we want to make sure that the workshops are announced and any updates on badges. Sujata, do you want to share anything on the workshops and badges, or has it? Yeah, either one.
Yeah. So like I'm updated in the morning, there are 18 registrations for the US time zone. Just 1 second. And 19 for the EMEA time zone. I don't know if people have seen the CNU post on LinkedIn. So yeah, we can use that post to send it to people. Just 1 second, I can just copy paste it here on the meeting chat.
Yeah. I think if you can post it here, if all of y'all can repost or find ways to share internally, that would be a good one.
Yeah, just 1 second. Yes.
Neil, are you doing a workshop on this in reInvent? Or I know Hasit and you are doing a talk, right?
No workshops. We're doing the breakout talk, but we have stuff that's not in the same ballpark, and that it's what Cave does, but we do have some AI workshops that are going on.
Okay. Yep, let's get some more eyes on the workshop. Hasit, anything you want to add on the workshop?
No, yeah, that's the thing. So if we can get some more registrations, that'll be good. So
yeah, we got pretty decent amount of stars. We do need to kind of get more wider attention and see if people can try out in different ways. Sujata, anything else?
I think
before
she
we
dropped.
close
She dropped.
Awesome. I think we got all these links. I'm going to copy all of these links into the chat. Last but not least, we will share a view of roadmap planning so that we'll have a much more cadence-based like updates. So we're not dropping a lot of code at once. So anyway, next week will be, I think we're coming close to Thanksgiving. I think we'll have one more meeting before we hit Thanksgiving. So we'll see you all of you next week.
Cool.
Thanks everyone. Take care.
See you guys. Bye.
Folks.